Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the money that the UK government seems to have willingly thrown away, including on Brexit, at the same time as it says it can't help pay for what the general population would regard as essentials. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is making a spring statement today. He is going to pretend to help manage the rising cost of living as the official inflation figure hits the highest level for over 30 years. Inflation is, of course, high in lots of comparable countries, but what is not quite the same is what the government are doing to ensure that people can manage. So let's do what the media never actually do with these sorts of issues. Let's do some comparisons. So let's take energy costs first. We know that domestic energy bills have increased by 54% in the UK recently, and they're quite likely to go up again at the end of this year. But it's only 4% in France, and we know why that is. And we know that the UK government could have chosen to do likewise, levy a one-off tax on energy companies in order to reduce the bills for customers. But the government refused to do this. The French government don't. So the French customers get to pay 4% higher energy costs. We get to pay 54% higher. But I want to look at this from another angle as well. So working out 54% of the average energy bill as it was for a medium-sized house in the UK, you get that the average bill will increase by something like £630 a year. Now, with 27.8 million households in the UK, and using that average figure, we can napkin maths that domestic energy bills will increase by about £17.5 billion across the UK. So in terms of judging whether or not the government are really helping, when Sunak delivers his speech, what we really need to ask is, can the government cover this cost? £17.5 billion, that's quite a lot of money. Now, the Tory argument is, well, you can't get money out of thin air, Harry. Where are we going to get the money from? There's no magic money tree and all that, even though they seem to find lots of magic money trees when they needed to. Where would the money come from? That's what they will ask. And that is a fair question. So let's see now. It's just been reported that as a direct result of our failure to implement proper Brexit border controls last year, the UK Treasury missed out on £30 billion worth of taxes during the first 6 months of 2021, when we delayed the implementation of declarations. Now, I discussed this at the time, when it became clear that the government had no intention of following up. See, the procedure was supposed to be that people did have to carry out declarations. It's not that the declarations didn't have to happen last year when we first left the single market and customs union. It's just that you could defer it for 6 months. So it's like, yeah, of course you've got to do your import declaration. You've got to pay all your taxes and everything. But, we'll give you 6 months grace period. Then as the time was getting close, the halfway through 2021, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs took the view that actually no bugger seems to know what's going on. If we try and ask for these declarations, businesses are just going to turn around to us and go, what declarations? What are you on about? Because the communication had been shocking. And so they didn't bother to chase up those declarations. So an estimated £30 billion, which remember, helped EU businesses stay competitive, that all went down the swanny. So how far would that £30 billion have gone? What did I say the extra cost of domestic energy is? Oh, £17.5 billion. So the government could have completely covered the rise in domestic energy costs. Never mind this, so instead of France going, well, our bills have just gone up 4%, yours have gone up 54%. We could say, oh, your bills have gone up 4%, have you? Ours haven't gone up at all. The government could have completely covered that with the £30 billion that they just chose not to collect last year. And they'd still have £12.5 billion left over. So what would that pay for? Well, let's look at the cost of petrol and diesel. See, that's increased, round me, about 25p a litre. In fact, exactly 25p a litre in the last month. So I'm going to assume it's roughly the same across the country. Going by the amount of fuel that was bought in 2020, and I'll come on to that in a moment, that would work out at £9.5 billion extra that we would be spending on diesel and petrol. Now, when it comes to fuel price rises, I've already said recently that the government should be taxing the oil companies properly. Instead of giving them tax breaks, actually make them pay taxes. then use the revenue generator to drop the fuel duty, because the government have got loads of leeway here, because a lot of the price at the pump, a lot of that is tax. A lot of tax in the cost of fuel. So sharing the tax burden is always going to be a better way of dealing with things. At the end of the day, if ordinary workers have to pay much higher costs, what happens? They face choices. They have to do without something. What they have to do without might be essential. It might be hot water. It might be food, on some days at least. Wealthy shareholders, if they have to take home smaller dividends, what changes to their life? Not buying the new holiday home? Do me a favour. But here's the thing. Even within the Tory thinking of allowing foreign shareholders to maintain high levels of wealth while we tax the hell out of our own citizens, Sunak could still have done that and paid for the extra cost of fuel as well. Now, granted, I'll come back to this. When I say that was the fuel in 2020, you'd think to yourself, well, hang on a minute, people weren't driving as much in 2020. Hadn't you heard about the pandemic? Yeah, of course. So we'd expect to use more fuel this year than in 2020. But that extra £9.5 billion was for the whole of 2020. This rise shouldn't be for the whole of 2022. Besides, he would still have £3 billion left over to cover any extra. So that £30 billion in import duties that the UK Treasury just decided not to collect, it was a political decision, could not only have paid entirely for this latest increase in energy costs for domestic users, only domestic users, but also the extra cost of petrol and diesel as well. So when the government say that they're doing all they can, but they can only do so much, ask them why they seem to be able to afford to write off tens of billions of pounds. Because think about why they did it. Why didn't they collect those import duties in the first half of last year? Why, for example, did EU countries collect import taxes on our products immediately? Because EU countries spent a long time trying to educate people and businesses about the realities of Brexit. Our government deliberately kept people and businesses in the dark about the realities so that we wouldn't stop them going ahead with it. But that was a deliberate political decision to keep us in the dark and put us in a position where we weren't ready to go from the start. It was made by the Conservative government under the same Prime Minister we have now and under the same Chancellor that we have now when it comes to it. So they don't get to blame external factors. They chose to have a messy start to Brexit so they can accept the responsibility. But their frivolity doesn't end with £30 billion worth of Brexit dues that they were happy to wave away whilst also claiming they can't afford to help British people out. The Treasury also wrote off £4.3 billion in furlough fraud as well. So although the furlough scheme was widely praised, it was pointed out at the time as well, this wasn't hindsight, at the time, that it was the way it was being implemented opened it up to massive levels of fraud and it was totally unnecessary. Sunak kept defending it. Oh, no, we've got to work quickly. And like Labour for a start and others as well said, no, you could just do this and then that would deal with it. He did nothing to prevent it. Even now that the scheme is over and in theory you could now let's sort the paperwork out. Let's see what was genuine, what wasn't. You know, people are urging the government to chase it up. You know, the amount it would cost to have investigators deal with it would be a relatively small amount compared to the £4.3 billion of estimated fraud. Just to track down the fraudulent claims and recover the money would cost next to nothing compared with what they would recover. But the government just drew a line under it and said, no, you can't be bothered now. And I'm sure it's nothing to do with the fact that some of the fraudsters may well have been Tory donors or even Tory politicians. But the point is that this is over £4 billion that the Treasury could get. They can choose to get that money, you know, and they could spend it on tackling the rising cost of living, but they're refusing to do so. That money could be used to help people struggling with the rising costs of food, couldn't it? And that's not all. The government also wrote off PPE losses caused by giving contracts to their mates instead of experienced and reputable suppliers. That amounted to £8.7 billion. So when you add up the money that the UK Treasury has as a result of deliberate policies just written off, got rid of, pissed away, it adds up to £43 billion just from those three sources, those big three sources. £43 billion would not only be able to completely cover the increase in the cost of energy, fuel and food for UK residents, but also build the 40 new hospitals that they promised but are failing to deliver on. Oh no, when we meant new hospitals, we actually just meant to new liquor paint. Or to knock down an existing hospital and then rebuild it. That's what we meant. This so-called party of fiscal responsibility, nothing more than a band of thieves. Just think how the next election would go if voters knew about this behaviour alone. Just this. Never mind their other cons. If they just knew about these 3 examples of deliberately depriving our public purse of tens of billions of pounds, while people's bills just go up and up and up, and the government could have dealt with it. It would be impossible for them to be elected. Impossible. They might be lucky to even get a dozen MPs returned to Parliament. Just think how different this country could be if the media actually reported the facts to the people. £43 billion completely written off by the Chancellor as a direct result of fraud, whether that be fraudulent claims on the parts of business people or defrauding the public about the consequences of Brexit. This same Chancellor who in Parliament today will be making a big speech about how he is helping people deal with the rising costs, even though he will not be, and how only he can go so far because, yes, I have to balance the books. But apparently balancing the books can still involve leaving massive holes in them with a sticker that says, yeah, don't look too closely at this, will you? But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.